Project governance. It's one of those terms you hear all the time in meetings, right? But if you actually stopped and asked 10 people to define it, you'd probably get 10 totally different answers. Is it a bunch of rules, a steering committee, or is it just more bureaucracy getting in the way? Well, today we're going to pull back that curtain on these unseen rules and really figure out what project governance is, and more importantly, why getting it right is so absolutely crucial for success.
So let's start with the big question right up front. What exactly is project governance? It sounds simple enough, doesn't it? But as you're about to see, the answer is surprisingly tricky. And honestly, it's the source of a ton of confusion out there in the project world. Okay, so if we look at what the experts have to say, well, the confusion becomes crystal clear. You've got some, like Mueller, who see governance as this really broad value system. Then you have others, like Garland or the Project Management Institute, who frame it more as a specific framework for making decisions and hitting your goals. You see the problem here, right? Everybody's using the exact same term, but they're all looking at it from completely different angles. It's no wonder it feels so hard to pin down.
And look, this isn't just some boring academic debate. This lack of a clear, shared understanding, this whole puzzle, it has very real consequences. It actually shapes how projects get chosen, how they're run, and at the end of the day, whether they sink or swim.
The heart of the problem, as researchers have pointed out time and again, is that the whole field is just fragmented. You have all these experts using the same term, project governance, but they're often talking about fundamentally different things. And that makes it incredibly difficult to build, a solid set of best practices that everyone can use. So how in the world do we solve this puzzle? Well, some really smart researchers traced the whole idea back to its origins, and they found a key insight that helps explain all of the confusion. It turns out there isn't just one idea of project governance out there. There are actually two.
And this, right here, is the big aha moment. The research shows that the entire field is basically split into two completely distinct streams of thought, and each one has its own set of assumptions and its own focus. Understanding these two streams, that's the key to finally making sense of all this.
So these two streams, they pretty much boil down to external and internal governance. Think of external governance as the top-down view. This is the parent company imposing rules on all of its projects to make sure they're aligned with the bigger corporate strategy. It's an intra-organizational thing within one company. But then, on the other hand, you've got internal governance. This is custom-built for a specific project, and it often involves a bunch of different partner companies. In this case, the focus is all about creating a shared set of rules to get all these different firms working together smoothly. It's an inter-organizational view.
And this little diagram just illustrates the difference perfectly. In that external view, governance is a one-way street. It flows down from the firm to its project. Simple enough. But in the internal view, the project is more like a temporary alliance, where the rules of the game are actually negotiated between all the partners. So, you see, your definition of governance depends entirely on which of these two realities you're living in.
Okay, so if we know all the confusion comes from these two competing views, how do we fix it? Well, we start by finding a clear, simple, unifying definition, one that connects governance directly to what really matters, an organization's strategy. I love this definition because it just cuts through all the noise. It's simple, it's powerful, and it's practical. Project governance is the system for direction, control, and accountability. See, it's not just about a list of rules. It's about having a whole system in place to steer the project, keep it on track, and make sure it answers for its results. This also clears up that crucial difference between governance and management. Think of it this way. Governance is the computer's operating system. It sets the rules and framework. Management is the application that runs within that system. Governance is all about asking, are we doing the right projects? Management, on the other hand, asks, are we doing projects right? One is about strategy, the other is all about execution.
And this is why it is so critical. Without effective governance, projects can just become these rogue operations, completely disconnected from the organization's goals. I mean, they might finish on time and on budget, but if they don't actually contribute to the overall strategy, what was the point? Governance is that essential link.
So how does governance actually do this? Well, it acts like a bridge for strategy. It kicks in at the very beginning, making sure we only select projects that actually serve a strategic purpose. Then it takes that high-level strategy and translates it into concrete, real-world objectives for the team. But it doesn't stop there. Good governance makes sure roles are crystal clear and, this is the most critical part, it sticks around to make sure the project's promised benefits are actually realized long after the ribbon has been cut.
Okay, so we've got a clear definition, and we know why it matters. But what does all this mean for your project? The key takeaway here is that there's no single universal governance system. One size definitely does not fit all.
The right approach depends entirely on the structure of your project. And really, the simplest way to figure out that structure is to just ask two basic questions. Who is funding this thing? And who is actually doing the work? The relationship between those two is what determines the kind of governance you're going to need. First up, we have Type 1 projects. This is the simplest setup you can get. A single organization both pays for and performs the work. A perfect example is an internal IT department building a new system for the marketing team. You have a really high level of control and flexibility. The biggest governance challenge here isn't managing outside contractors. It's managing internal stakeholders in politics to keep everybody aligned and on the same page. Next is Type 2. This is your classic client-contractor relationship. One organization funds the project and another one gets hired to do the work. Like building a new office building. Here, direct control gets replaced by contractual control. The key governance challenges are making sure the contractor's interests are aligned with your own and managing the risk that they might act opportunistically. Because let's face it, they often know more about the detailed work than you do. And finally, we have the most complex form, Type 3 projects. These are networks with multiple funding organizations and multiple performing organizations all involved. Think of a massive public-private partnership to build a new transit line. Here, control is shared and decision-making is done by committee. The main governance challenge is, frankly, monumental. It's balancing the competing interests of all the different partners to keep the project moving toward one single unified vision. So you can see this really clear progression, right? You move from the direct control and internal politics of a Type 1 project to the contractual puzzles of a Type 2, and finally, to the shared control and competing interests of a Type 3 network. Each step up in complexity demands a fundamentally different system of governance. So this brings us to our final question, the one I want you to take back to your own work. Now that you can see these different project types and their unique challenges, take a good hard look at whatever you're working on right now. Is your governance system, those unseen rules that guide every single decision, is it actually designed for your project's unique reality? Or are you trying to apply Type 1 rules to a much more complex Type 3 problem? Getting that answer right? Well, that can make all the difference.